Hey everyone, part two of the Dan and Joe Sports Show March Madness preview. We're looking at the South and the East regionals on this one. We just got done talking about what I think could be maybe the most exciting Sweet 16 matchup if it happens in Gonzaga and UCLA. I mean, you think about that incredible Final Four matchup we had a couple years ago when Gonzaga was undefeated throughout the entire season. UCLA had made that great run from the first four all the way to the final four, and it took that excellent, almost half court bank shot for Gonzaga to win that game and deny UCLA. And I think this is a game of two teams that maybe both have the ability to win it all. They both got close a couple years ago. They both have so many senior leadership, with UCLA having Jaime Jaquez and Tyre Campbell, and Gonzaga having Drew Timme and being a little bit of an under the radar team. I think this may be one of the games of the tournament.
I really think so, Dan. And, it also has that history from the Adam Morrison days, with Jordan Farmar, like 17 years ago now, which is hard to believe. And I think also the cool thing about this matchup from 2 years ago is that we've also got the returning players from that game. It's kind of a sequel with the same cast with Timme and Campbell and Jaquez. And so I think that's really cool. I think that, it's kind of a coin flip game. I kind of am predicting that Timmy's going to take over and Gonzaga can outlast them. But if I, have a criticism of this Gonzaga team, I feel like their guard play is not as good as it usually is. They don't have, that Jalen Suggs or a Nigel Williams-Goss that they've had in the past.
Right, exactly, man. And that was, Jalen's the reason they won that game 2 years ago by making that shot and by having that ability. I mean, Suggs was the difference in that Gonzaga team being number one throughout most of the season and being undefeated versus being just a good Mark Few team.
Mm-hmm. So I'll be interested to see their guards against Tyre Campbell, in crunch time.
And I kind of think too with UCLA, I mean, they've been so close the last couple of years. I mean, they go toe to toe with Gonzaga in that Final Four game, don't get it done. Last year, that game they had against North Carolina, that was a classic game, and you kind of felt like whoever came out of that was going to make a run. North Carolina beat them in a tight one, ended up making it all the way to the national championship game. So you feel like they just keep getting closer and closer with UCLA. And that's the reason I just kind of like them this year. I think with all of that experience they've had going as far as they have, I really like Mick Cronin, his defense that he has. And I just really think this is definitely the Bruins' year.
I'll certainly be interested, to see how far they go.
That's it. Now let's talk about the team that everyone thinks it is their year. There's we've been talking about controversy with Chris Beard and everything, but this is the team that made the Chris Beard hire by Ole Miss because of under the radar, which is a lot of controversy they have, and that's the bad news Bama right now. I mean, they've been destroying people. They they come in and have just an amazing tournament in the SEC. I mean, they were far and away the best team in the country during that tournament. They really kind of elevated their play, and you kind of feel like when things started getting out there about the Brandon Miller story, they kind of took a little bit of a step down for a couple of weeks. They got closer to losing, ultimately did lose to A&M, but they really got it all together in the SEC tournament, and looks like they're trying to make a big run.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, with the exception of, the possibility of having to play a team like Maryland or West Virginia in the second round, which the West Virginia, press can be very difficult. I think for the most part, they've got a very easy path to the Final Four.
I think so too, Joe. I looked at what they had, in front of them, and I was a little bit nervous about the chance that they would play a Virginia team in the Sweet 16. Virginia, of course, they won national championship a few years ago. Tony Bennett, that's a very tough, frustrating style. And you think that, with Alabama, it might frustrate some of their freshman players like Brandon Miller and a Jaden Bradley. But I think the difference that Alabama would have that would get him a win over a team like Virginia is having Javon Quinterly. Quinterly is such a solid player that has done so great at the end of the season. And in a lot of ways, he's kind of taken over as the best player for Alabama in these last few games. And that's what you want right now is your guards to take over.
Yes, without a doubt. I think he is the key ingredient to them making a deep run. Miller's going to be the headliner, but I think that Quinterly really, can spur the lead for them. But here's the interesting thing, Dan, about this region for me. I think that this region's kind of upset heavy here at the top. Like, I think that there's a good chance that the College of Charleston is going to upset San Diego State.
I have that one.
In the College of Charleston, I think that they're just tailor-made, Dan, to be one of those kind of Cinderella stories of this tournament. They've got one player on their team, I can't remember his name, who's a 7-year senior, got a lot of leaders on the team. And I just think they're going to be, I don't know if they're going to be the St. Peter's of this tournament because I don't think anybody can be, but I think they're going to be one of those teams that we walk away feeling like they're household names at the end of the tournament. And then shockingly, I have Furman over Virginia as well.
Oh, wow, Joe, that's a huge upset. But I will say this, as much as I love Tony Bennett and as successful as he is, who's the only 1 seed to ever lose in the NCAA tournament? Ding, ding, ding. That would be Tony Bennett and Virginia. So that's a possibility. He's been known to do that before, go out early in the tournament. And Furman's a team that, I mean, people love their coach. That was another coach that was rumored to go to Ole Miss. And I think there was a time where Furman may have been right on the outside of the top 25, as was College of Charleston. So that's a possibility. I like Tony Bennett. I like Virginia. But this is not the same kind of level of Virginia team that won the national championship a few years ago.
Right. And they've had some years where if they don't make a deep run in the tournament, they'll lose in the round of 64. I was looking back at it, I think including maybe last year. And so I just think there's a chance they could lose. And then I think if they lose to Furman, that allows the College of Charleston to make it to the Sweet 16.
I think so too. Yeah, I think that would be a great opportunity for College of Charleston. I don't like them beating Virginia, but I could definitely see them beating Furman.
Because then that just seemed like the perfect draw for Alabama to get the College of Charleston and Sweet 16.
Yeah. If you really take away any chance that Alabama, gets a little bit of backdoor dealing from the referees, then if they play College of Charleston, I think they're okay. That was another thing that I was worried about, that if they got into a matchup with Virginia, with kind of, the culture of Tony Bennett, how everybody respects him, they love the University of Virginia, and with the story of Alabama, that was one that kind of like scared me a little bit, that maybe I could see a little bit of Brandon Miller getting a lot of unnecessary fouls called on him and things like that,
No, that's a good point.
But that will not be the case if they play the College of Charleston.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Creighton and NC State's an interesting one to me. I was sitting there talking about comparing the resumes of Clemson and NC State in the last show. But Creighton is a program that you feel like always gets a lot of love. When they had McDermott, that was such a great player. And they have good regular seasons in the Big East, but they don't ever seem to do anything in the tournament, though. They really don't. I feel like they're always a team that people keep saying, oh, watch out for Creighton. They're going to make a big run, and then they never really do it.
They've had some years where they have been upset, like with McDermott, but this year I'm embracing them more than usual because at one point this year, I think they were a top 10 team. I think they were preseason top 10. And so there were a lot of people that even though, Marquette won the Big East, they were like, Creighton may be as talented as anybody. And so I actually have Creighton advancing to the Sweet 16 this year. Okay.
All right. Well, that's one that I've been sitting there thinking a lot about because NC State is a team that doesn't really, I'm not really that fascinated by them. I think they were, if you were going to leave one of those ACC teams out, I think they maybe should have been the one that got left out.
Yeah, they were definitely, on the bubble there. But, Baylor, I'm nervous about how they finished the season. I think they have 9 or 10 losses. So I was kind of surprised to see them get a 3 seed. That kind of goes back to that, Big 12 bias. But, Baylor's going to have their hands full with UCSB. I don't think that's going to be an easy game at all.
I think USCB, didn't they beat somebody last year in the tournament?
They probably did. I think they've got a lot of people coming back.
Yeah. I was listening to all these people like lauding Baylor, and I was like, did you not look at the fact they lost their last 3 games of the regular season?
It feels so much, Dan, like that Baylor team that lost to R.J. Hunter and Georgia State. Like, I think they could easily lose.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought there, Joe. I'm not very fascinated by this Baylor team either, so I could see them maybe losing that game. Joe, moving down, Missouri and Utah State. I've got Missouri winning this one, but Missouri is not a team that I'm not that impressed with. People have been like trying to sell me on the fact that they're really good this year, But every time I watch them, I kind of see them just get their bell rung by people. So I don't really know what the fascination with Missouri is this year.
They've got some playmakers. They got like a first-year head coach, Kobe Brown's, really good player for them. And so I think there's talent, but I don't think that their tournament will go further than the round of 32.
So that's where I have them at too. We go playing in 32. Arizona taking on Princeton. I think Arizona's going to win that. Arizona this year, they're good, but they're not quite what they were a year ago, though. And and I haven't really. I've been trying to figure out the way I think about them. They split their series with UCLA this year. I think they beat them once, and UCLA beat them during the Pac-12 championship tournament. How do you see this Arizona team? Do you see them one as making a deep run?
Yeah, I have them going to the Elite Eight and losing to Bama at Bama in my Final Four. But I think that a lot of people are going to pick Arizona to make it to the Final Four. I think my concern with them is they don't have a player like Quinterly or even a player like Brendan Miller. I feel like they're really front court heavy with Ballo and Petulis. And I think that could hurt them if they go up against a team, with really good guards.
That's where I'm at too. I've also got Arizona going at Alabama in the Elite Eight. And I think the biggest problem that Arizona has is they don't have any defense. They can score with the best of any team out there, but they cannot stop a cold. You look at their defense, they give up like 70+ points a game. And eventually, if you have defense that's poor, it's going to come back and bite you.
Mm-hmm. That's true, because the defense travels and the cold shooting nights can do you in.
Exactly. So I think they're a team that, can take advantage of, a weaker Missouri and Baylor. But when they play Alabama, they're not going to be able to stop Quinterly and Miller and all those scoring options that they have.
I can see that.
All right, Joe, moving down to the East region, this is one that I find myself, this is the one that I think I have the most upsets in. I was really all over the place with this bracket. Starting with, Purdue taking on, I know FAU's been a really great story, and having them as a 9 seeds, pretty intense. But am I wrong? I love this Memphis team. They just killed Houston. They played toe-to-toe with Alabama early in the season. I think they lost by 2 points to Alabama. They beat Auburn. I think this is an underseeded Memphis team at 8, and I think Purdue is on serious upset alert in the second round, and I actually had Memphis beating Purdue.
I can see it, Dan. I think it was Andy Katz was talking about it on a show the other day. He was like, if Purdue-Memphis happens in the round of 32, that may be one of the best games of the tournament. It could be the toughest test for Purdue in this entire region, if not the entire tournament, with the matchup problems that they might cause for Edey inside with the Memphis front court. The travesty here for me, too, is Memphis is underseeded, and FAU had just a historic season by their standards, only lose 3 games in the regular season, win Conference USA, and they have to play Memphis in the first round. And so I think that's an interesting game, but I have Memphis winning. I think it's kind of a shame for FAU.
Yeah, Joe, you and I have said this so many times, how they'll punish these mid-majors teams by putting them in a way where they play a 1 seed in the second round. Or even when they're a 1 seed, like Wichita State, you drop Kentucky all the way down to an 8 seed, so they had to take on Kentucky in the second round. And that's another example of it right here, where they're taking on a severely underseeded 8 seed in Memphis, who probably in my mind is more like a 5 or a 6 seed. And then if they win, then their gift is they get to take on 7'4" Zach Edey in Purdue.
Right. It's senseless. They easily, could have put FAU against like Maryland as an 8 seed. It'd be completely different, but of course they don't do that.
Or West Virginia or somebody like that, but instead they choose a team who is worthy of being a 5 or a 6 and put them in an 8 line to take them on.
That's going to be tough.
Joe, here's one. I looked at my 5-12s. I don't have as many this year as I usually do, but I chose this one, and it's probably going to be like an unpopular one, but I like Oral Roberts beating Duke. Oral Roberts has made some good runs the last couple years. Duke is a team that they kind of got hot at the end of the year, but I really feel like for the most part they underachieved a lot this year in their first year with Shire. And I think there's going to be so much pressure on them now to have a good run. North Carolina's out of the tournament. He's having his first year with Mike Krzyzewski. That I kind of feel like this is a sneaky matchup to where a good upset possibility is there.
Okay, so with the matchup, I think the matchup I'm as intrigued by Duke Oral Roberts as maybe any other first round matchup. And it's the 12-5 concept, but it's also Oral Roberts like UCLA and Gonzaga. They've got a lot of veterans from their Sweet 16 run a couple of years ago. Max Abmas was just spectacular
Oh
2 years
yeah.
ago. He's back. He's here for Oral Roberts. He's going to put on a show. So I'm really intrigued, but I do have Duke winning. I think that them winning the ACC tournament, the play of Jeremy Roach coming back, Kyle Filipowski, I really think that Duke is poised to have a really good run in this tournament.
Okay. Well, that'll definitely be one to watch right there. Because I think if Duke can get past that game, then I think they would have a great chance against a Tennessee team who's without their starting point guard, who really kind of struggled at the very end of the season, losing a lot of games, not even really being competitive in them, and yet still getting a pretty high seed compared to what the results were.
Oh yeah, like I actually have Louisiana out of the Sun Belt. I have them defeating Tennessee. I think that losing that point guard, I think that's going to be a big loss for Tennessee, and they're going to be ripe for an upset here.
Yeah, Joe, you've had some picks going on there, man. I think you have at least 2 13s over 4s based on what I've seen so far.
I do, because I also have Furman over Virginia. And like I said earlier, kind of my narrative this year is I'm being a little bit bolder than normal because I feel like, in the past, it's just never worked out for me playing it safe.
Well, they said this is the most open tournament that we've had in a long time, and your picks are really showing it. And like I said, I tend to have a couple 13s too. I haven't quite gone there this year, but I don't think you're wrong about that. Louisiana is a good program. I know in the Sun Belt, South Alabama made a really good run where they didn't have a great regular season, but they made it to the conference championship game playing great in the tourney, and then they lost to Louisiana. So I think Louisiana's a good team.
They really are, and I think that they could pull off this upset. And what you're talking about with the unpredictability of this year's tournament. I think case in point, there's so many teams that can make the Final Four this year. I didn't put a double-digit seed in the Final Four, but don't be shocked if we have a team like a George Mason from years ago that just comes out of nowhere and makes it to the Final Four.
I could definitely see that this year. Maybe an Oral Roberts start type team, or someone that you have sitting down there. Maybe someone like Arizona State catches fire. I think there's definitely some programs out there that could do it.
Sure.
Joe, here's one right here. How about Providence taking on Kentucky? What a fascinating first round matchup that is. Providence was a team that for a lot of the season, they were in the top 25. I mean, the Friars had a really good program. Of course, Providence has got a great basketball history. Kentucky really kind of caught fire at the end of the season. But this is kind of a coin flip game in my mind. This is one I could easily see Kentucky lose, and I was going a lot on this one back and forth.
Well, it's tough because I like Kentucky to win because I think they can actually make a little bit of a run here if they can upset Marquette potentially or Kansas State. But when I look at this matchup against Providence, I think what concerns me for Kentucky is their lack of NCAA tournament winning experience on their roster. I don't think they have a single player on their roster that's ever won an NCAA tournament game. And we know what happened last year to St. Peter's. And so I'm cautious about this, but I do like Kentucky to win this game. And I ultimately have Kentucky in my Elite Eight.
That's where I've got Kentucky going out in my Sweet 16 to Marquette. I like Marquette over Kentucky.
Okay.
But yeah, I like Kentucky to win a couple games too. I think it's very important for John Calipari that he makes the Sweet 16 after what happened last year to St. Peter's. And I think that they've been playing so much better. I mean, you look at it going into that loss to Vanderbilt, which in my mind made that Vanderbilt win over them even more impressive, getting back into how I'm getting on my stump about how Vanderbilt should have been in the NCAA tournament. Kentucky was playing their best basketball at the end of the season. They went from a team that a month ago was slated to not make the NCAA tournament all the way up to a solid 6 seed because of the way they played. They have, the reigning national player of the year in Oscar Tshiebwe. They got a lot of talent still, and they kind of gelled at the end of the year. So I think Kentucky is a team that has a great chance to make the Sweet 16, and they can maybe beat a Marquette and make the Elite Eight.
They really can. Because I think that having Oscar Tshiebwe and some of the players they have on this roster, I think they're a deeper team than Marquette. Marquette, to me, is more perimeter-oriented. Like I really like Tyler Kolek and some of the players that they have for Shaka Smart, but I just think that Kentucky may be able to be more physical. Now, if I'm looking at a sleeper in this region, Dan, I could easily see Kansas State be the team that we're not talking about enough, and maybe they actually make it to the Final Four. I would say out of the regions, if you just want to pick like a team where you're like, this is a good team, but maybe not like a team that's really on the radar, I think K-State would be my pick to make a deep run. And they have such a great story with Keontae Johnson, of course, with what he's been through when he was at Florida.
That's right, Joe. I mean, their coach was the Big 12 Coach of the Year. I think this was his first season at Kansas State, too. And, they've been a real great story. I know they beat Kansas here. I think they beat Texas, too. They've got a lot of really solid wins. I just, in my mind, them taking on Kentucky in the second round, I just can't go against Kentucky in that one. Like I said, I just feel like this is a Sweet 16 at least or bust year for Calipari with all the noise that they've had and, people being upset at them this year. I think they're going to be highly motivated. Otherwise, I think I probably would have taken Kansas State in that game.
I gotcha. Yeah, I mean, that's a tough draw for K-State, as a 3 seed to get a blue blood like Kentucky with the motivation too. I did want to ask you, like, how far do you think Michigan State can make it in this tournament?
Joe, this is weird. I usually love Tom Izzo, and I usually pick Michigan State to make pretty deep runs. But I'm not a big fan of Michigan State this year. I'm very down on the Big Ten in general. I think they're severely overrated this year. I know they got a lot of teams in, but when you watch their basketball brand, it's just kind of blah. I mean, they don't have a lot of teams that score a lot of points. Indiana and Iowa are kind of the exceptions to that. They both can really go out and score. But a lot of these teams are very offensively challenged. And I don't think Michigan State's really done a whole lot this year. I've actually got USC winning that game. I think USC is a much better team than people give them credit for. They beat Auburn this year. I think they may have beaten Arizona too. And I really like the coach that USC has. He's had a lot of good sustained success. And I feel like Izzo's program's just been slipping a little bit the last couple of years. So I'm usually a huge Tom Izzo fan. I like them to make big runs, but I got them to go out in the first round this year.
Well, what was it like 2 years ago? I think they were the team that lost to UCLA in the first 4, and then UCLA went on the deep run. And so, hey, if USC was able to win this game, I mean, it was 10 years ago that their head coach, Andy Enfield, made that a historic run to the Sweet 16 at Florida Gulf Coast. So, that could be really cool. Before we close on this region, I did want to say just something overall about Purdue. Just kind of my thoughts on them, because I feel like, everybody's concentrating on Purdue as one of the favorites, and rightfully so. Zach Edey is just an unbelievable player, national player of the year. But when I look at Purdue, Dan, I'm nervous about this team because I don't feel like they have the superstar guard. I talked about this with a lot of teams, like, are they too front court heavy or are they too guard heavy? And I definitely think that Purdue is just overly reliant on Edey. It's kind of like they're an old school team, having somebody like a Hakeem Olajuwon or a Patrick Ewing. And I think that you're going to see some teams be able to expose that. I could easily see them going out to Memphis, like you said. I ultimately think that they're going to lose to Duke in the Sweet 16.
Okay.
I've heard a lot of people concentrating on Purdue's matchup against Duke earlier in the season where they lost by like 20 points. But that was back on November 27th. And we've seen Duke make a lot of adjustments with Filipowski since then. And so I think he's going to do a much better job on Edey this go around. And I ultimately have Duke making it past Purdue and Kentucky and all the way to the Final Four.
Oh, wow, Joe. You're really buying into the Shire program year one right there. Well, I mean, that would be such a great season for him, filling in for Coach K with all those shoes to fill to make it to the Final Four. I really like what they did at the end of the year, but I'm not really sold on Duke yet.
Yeah, I have Duke in the final, and I talked about Purdue. Purdue won the Big Ten, but Indiana beat Purdue all 3 times or twice this year when they played. And so I actually shockingly have Indiana over Duke traced at Jackson Stadium, my national championship game. Like, Purdue's had the great season, but I think it's going to be the other team, Mike Woodson in Indiana, that celebrates.
Well, Gene Hackman's going to be excited. Hoosiers, baby. I mean, that would be such a great thing for Indiana with their number one rival having this incredible season and they go out and win the national championship. That would be amazing.
It'd be crazy.
I like that though. I mean, I love Indiana. Like my grandmother was a huge Indiana fan. That's where she went to college at. I've got a cousin that went to Indiana. It's always been a place I've wanted to go and visit. And so I always like Indiana basketball. I've got them making it to the Final Four and losing to UCLA. So I also have Indiana make a good run. So my championship game, Joe, get this. I got Bama taking on UCLA and UCLA getting the win.
Wow.
I think that would be awesome because you know what I told you, right? I said I think the fix is in on this tournament that at some point Alabama is going to play a blue blood type program and they're going to get a lot of bad calls against them because they don't want Alabama to win with what's been going on. And the way I have it set up, I don't think they take on a blue blood team that's good enough to have enough to get it and get the edge of the officials until they take on UCLA in the national championship. And then I think, you have the 13 national championships of UCLA. You have all these great players they've had for a long time that are guys that have stuck around that people have a lot of credit for. Everybody likes Mick Cronin. And I kind of think that that's going to be when you're going to see a lot of whistles go against Alabama and UCLA gets the win.
And that's such a matchup of irony, building off of your points, because I still can't believe that Alabama in men's basketball is the number one seed in the tournament. And then to think about the fact that you have them playing UCLA potentially in the finals, the most storied program, arguably, are right up there with anybody. And so that would just be quite the narrative for that matchup to happen. And also a rematch of 2 years ago, that epic Sweet 16 game.
That's right. They did. They had an incredible Sweet 16 game because that was when Alabama was probably the number 1-2 seed, I think, when they got in that tournament with Herb Jones and a lot of really great talented players. And that was when UCLA let everybody know, hey, we're for real. And they made that run and, of course, almost beat Gonzaga to get to the championship. And so I just kind of saw that, like, the storyline seems to match up for me with that one. I just kind of have a feel that's what it's going to end up being.
That would be really exciting. I did want to ask the last question I had is, who did you have in the East region? Do you think like Marquette or somebody like that could win it?
I did, Joe. I ended up going with Shaka Smart and Marquette. I've always liked Shaka Smart as a coach, and I thought that Texas can be just such a tough place for people to win that don't really know how to deal with the booster culture and how you're kind of like a salesman and a coach at the same time. And Shaka Smart always seemed like to me as someone that's just a great basketball coach when he's in a place where he doesn't have to deal with all that outside stuff. And now you put him in Marquette, it's a small Catholic school in Wisconsin that's good at basketball, and suddenly he's back in his element, and he can just go out there and coach and not have to deal with all the kind of stuff that you saw, Mac Brown have to do at Texas to make it successful, and how all these people have had so much trouble since. And I just really like what Shaka Smart can do, and I have him running through, and I've got Marquette beating Memphis in the Elite Eight to make the Final Four.
Wow, that would be a fun matchup with Shaka Smart matched up against Penny Hardaway from a coaching standpoint.
Yeah, and Joe, I think I also may have a little bit of just a soft spot in my heart for Penny Hardaway because he was my favorite basketball player growing up, and I just love him being the head coach at Memphis where he played basketball at. And his ability to recruit, how great of a high school coach he was. And I just see that as the coolest matchup of coach and program. And I just think that, the sky's the limit for them.
They've got a good chance, and you have them taking out Purdue. I mean, the last thing I wanted to say about Purdue, I mean, can we avoid the narrative that Purdue just never seems to make it to the Final Four? Like, I feel like that has to be part of the equation here too.
Oh, it's a huge part of the equation. And Joe, I think the team that they had that beat Tennessee, and when Tennessee was really good, and I think number one seed, and that was when they had Jaden Ivey. That was the team that I thought was a better Purdue team than this one. I think that they are limited when you get outside of Edey, and you're talking about what you said earlier. They don't have any guards, and I think the problem is when they take on a team that has size, which Memphis does, and can take away Edey, then I just think they're going to lose to somebody, and they don't have, I think, the scoring diversity to make it a long way in this tournament.
Right. And can't you just imagine it being a tough situation for them if he gets in foul trouble?
Yes, that's what I'm thinking too. And so I just see that I think Memphis is a rough matchup for them. I think if somehow FAU were to beat Memphis, I think Purdue would beat them. Um, what I'm interested to see is, I've been debating in my mind the last thing on this East Regional is whether I see Oral Roberts making the Sweet 16. I have him over Duke, but my question would be, do they beat Tennessee? I think that you follow Duke with a Tennessee team that has limitations in scoring, and maybe Oral Roberts is one of these teams that can make the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I think if they were to beat Duke, I think they would win against whoever they played in the round of 32. Because, like I said earlier, Max Abmas, I mean, he's one of the best players in the country. It's not just the mid-major label. I mean, he's like a 20-something point per game scorer.
Absolutely. And Joe, out of all of these regions, the East one was the one that I had the most trouble with. I think that's the most wide open region.
Yeah, I had trouble with that one, and then the other one was the Houston region in the Midwest. Like I think there's a good chance that Houston loses to Auburn or Iowa in the second round, and so to me, if that happens, then like the whole region could be turned upside down.
Absolutely, Joe. I mean, and that what I see is I see Indiana taking out Auburn in the Sweet 16 because while I like Auburn's ability to beat a team like Houston that has a little bit of limitations in scoring, of course, Houston's a great defensive team, but Auburn is also a very good defensive team at times. Indiana just is such a great scoring team. And I think that Trace Jackson Davis playing at the guard position and scoring so much, Auburn has shown that good guards can wreak havoc on them. Like I've seen what Javon Quinterly has done to Auburn both times that they played them. I think Trace Jackson Davis is a little bit of a better player than Quinterly. I think Quinterly can be a top 10 player in college basketball. But I think Davis is just a little step above him. And so that's why, even though I have Auburn beating Houston, I don't think they can beat Indiana.
Yeah. I think that it'd be tough to survive that and then, be able to come back, in the next round. But yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people still have Houston making it to the Final Four. I even saw some prognosticators had them winning the national championship. It would be a cool story with the Final Four being in Houston, but I agree. I just can't quite see them doing it. I think that they're going to lose earlier than expected.
Yeah, and I really like Houston. I mean, and I love their coach. I mean, he's done everything but win a national championship, and he keeps like kind of knocking on the door of it. But I don't quite think that this year's team is it. I think it's going to take till they get to the Big 12 before they finally win a national championship, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and that's been the issue we sometimes see with Gonzaga when they get to like the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight. When you play in a conference like that, even if you're good, you don't have as many games that are physical. And then you get to the NCAA tournament and you have a round of 32 team against a team like Auburn. And it's like, wow, maybe you're a better team, but you've suddenly got to face a team that's going to play more defense and be more physical.
Exactly. I mean, and let's say they even made it to the Elite Eight and had to take on a team like Texas A&M. I don't think they'd beat Texas A&M either. So I think that Houston's got some problems, and I think that they're going to take on battle-hardened team in the second round, either Auburn or Iowa, that both take on a lot of really good teams. Houston, meanwhile, they did some good things in the non-conference, but when you get to their conference, really the only other good team was Houston, and they got boat raced by them in that AAC championship. So I'm very concerned about Houston, and I think that they lose in the second round.
Yeah, and that was a good line that you said, whether directly or indirectly, about them having problems.
Absolutely. All right, Joe, we got ourselves a fascinating tournament ahead of us, and it seems like every year it gets harder and harder to pick a bracket. And this year, I see a lot of scratch-out marks already on my bracket, and it's going to be tough for me to get it finalized. But I feel good about my championship game with Bama and UCLA, with UCLA winning it all. It's just the stuff around it I need to think about.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great tournament. Can't wait for it to start. And I think, it's going to be cool to see the household names that we start knowing in a few days.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening to the show. You can catch all of our episodes on Spotify. You can catch us in live and living color on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to the @Dan and Joe Sports Show YouTube channel. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter @DJ Sports Show and like our Facebook fan page. And also, you can follow us on Instagram too. I know all of our gymnastics videos have been getting a lot of traction on Instagram lately. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.